This was supposed to be invisible, a quiet substitution buried in the fine print of the NFL calendar, a logistical move that usually comes and goes without headlines, without debate, without anyone circling it on a timeline. One quarterback advances to the Super Bowl, a replacement fills the slot, and the league moves on. That's how it's always worked. But this time, the replacement didn't slide in unnoticed. It detonated a conversation. When Shedeur Sanders was announced as a Pro Bowl replacement, the response was immediate and loud. Not curiosity, not congratulations, outrage. The timeline flipped from silence to skepticism in minutes. Was this earned? Was this forced? Was this just another example of the league chasing clicks instead of credibility? What should have been a footnote became a flashpoint, and the tone of the reaction mattered more than the announcement itself. Because on the surface, the argument felt simple. The stats were there for anyone looking to disqualify him. Limited starts, modest production, numbers that didn't scream dominance, and voices with credibility didn't hesitate to say it out loud. Cam Newton, never one to soften a take, called it rage bait. To traditionalists, that settled it. Case closed. The Pro Bowl, once reserved for elite output, had officially gone off script, or so it seemed. But something strange happened next. The backlash didn't shrink the moment, it expanded it. Every critical clip, every dismissive headline, every sarcastic reaction only pushed Shedeur's name further into the spotlight. This wasn't a debate about arm strength or efficiency. It wasn't even about whether he belonged on a roster of all-stars. It became a referendum on what value actually means in today's NFL. And that's where things started to shift. Because the Pro Bowl nod itself didn't change his stat line. It didn't rewrite game film or retroactively flip interceptions into touchdowns. What it did was far quieter and far more powerful. It attached an official designation to his name, Pro Bowl quarterback. No asterisk that survives in negotiation rooms, no parenthetical that appears on contracts. Once it's logged, it travels with you, forever. And that's why this moment mattered more than people realized. In a league that's increasingly driven by optics, engagement, and narrative velocity, visibility is no longer cosmetic, it's capital. The difference between being talked about and being ignored is the difference between leverage and obscurity, and with one announcement, Shedeur crossed that line. Not through dominance, not through consensus, through attention. For the Cleveland Browns, that attention creates a complicated reality. They didn't just draft a quarterback, they stumbled into a storyline that now lives outside the field, one that moves merchandise, fuels debates, and keeps cameras trained even when the box score doesn't demand it. This wasn't a game invite, it was a signal, and the league knew exactly what it was doing by letting it play out. Because whether people loved the selection or hated it, everyone talked about it. And in today's NFL, that's the only thing that truly matters. The selection that wasn't supposed to matter just reframed how value is noticed, measured, and eventually paid. And once that switch flips, there's no flipping it back. The opening didn't come from hype or hype-driven campaigning, it came from logistics. One quarterback season kept going when everyone else's stopped. Drake May earned his way into the Super Bowl, and with that came an automatic absence from the Pro Bowl. That's how the system works. If you're still playing for a championship, you don't suit up for an exhibition. A replacement steps in. Usually, that replacement barely registers beyond a transaction note and a brief graphic on social media. That mechanism matters because it frames what this moment was supposed to be. Not a reward, not a declaration, just a vacancy filled so the event could move forward. Every year, multiple Pro Bowlers bow out for the same reason, and replacements rotate in without disrupting the narrative of the season. No debates, no think pieces, no outrage cycles. The slot exists purely because the league needs bodies on the field. And by that logic, Shedeur Sanders wasn't chosen ahead of anyone. He wasn't promoted over a clear snub. He was selected into an opening created by circumstance, not comparison. The league didn't say he was better than the rest. They said the event needed a quarterback, and his name fit the moment. That distinction should have muted the reaction. Instead, it did the opposite. Because replacement designations carry a strange duality, official enough to count, quiet enough to ignore. Except this one landed differently. The announcement didn't live in isolation. It landed in a season already heavy with quarterback uncertainty, media scrutiny, and shifting expectations. The timing turned a routine procedural move into a spotlight moment. The reality is, the Pro Bowl structure all but guarantees controversy now. Fan voting, player input, coach selections, opt-outs, injuries, Super Bowl qualifications. By the time replacements are named, the best of the best idea has already blurred. The roster becomes a hybrid of merit, availability, and narrative momentum. That's not a secret, it's the design. And it's why arguing this pick as if it violated a sacred standard misses how loose that standard has already become. This wasn't a late-season surge or a playoff run that forced the league's hand. It was a convergence of timing and attention. The slot opened because someone else was too successful to fill it. What's unusual isn't that a replacement was needed, it's who became the focal point once the name was announced. And that's where the shift begins. Because once the slot opened, the league still had options, names with quieter profiles, names that would have passed through the news cycle without friction. But friction is engagement, and engagement turns routine decisions into talking points. What happened next wasn't random, it was predictable. Because in the modern NFL, the opening of a Pro Bowl slot isn't just about who fills it, it's about what story fills the silence left behind. The reaction didn't build slowly, it hit all at once. Within hours of the announcement, the discourse flipped from curiosity to condemnation. Clips resurfaced, stat lines were screenshot, comparisons were thrown around without context. The tone wasn't interesting choice, it was how is this possible? And that intensity mattered because it revealed how primed the audience already was to push back. Former players, analysts, and fans lined up on the same side of the argument almost immediately. The loudest critique centered on production, or more accurately, the lack of it. For a league that spent decades preaching merit, consistency, and earned respect, this felt like a step too far. Then came the soundbite that lit the fuse. Cam Newton didn't hedge, he called it rage bait. Not a mistake, not a reach, something deliberately designed to provoke. That framing traveled fast. Rage bait implies intent. It suggests the league knew this would upset people and did it anyway. And once that idea took hold, every part of the selection was reinterpreted through that lens. The replacement labels stopped mattering. The process stopped mattering. Only thing anyone wanted to talk about was why this name, at this moment, made everyone so uncomfortable. The numbers became weapons. 7 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, limited starts. Those stats weren't debated, they were deployed. Posted over and over like receipts meant to end the conversation. To many, this felt like the breaking point, proof that branding was officially outweighing performance. The outrage wasn't just about one player, it was about fear that the league's priorities had shifted somewhere unfamiliar. But here's the thing most critics missed in real time. The backlash didn't slow the story down, it sped it up. Every take, every clip, every dismissive laugh stretched the lifespan of the moment. What could have faded in a news cycle instead turned into a loop. Podcast segments fed social posts fed television debates fed more online arguments. The reaction became the content. And that's where this gets uncomfortable for purists, because in trying to discredit the selection, critics amplified it. They made it unavoidable. The moment didn't survive despite the backlash, it survived because of it. The outrage validated the pick's relevance before anyone even got a chance to forget it. There's an old assumption that negative attention damages players, that criticism weakens credibility, that being polarizing is a disadvantage. In the modern NFL ecosystem, that assumption is breaking down. Polarization drives engagement, and engagement drives value. Whether fans were defending the pick or tearing it apart, they were still circulating the name, and circulation is leverage. What looked like rejection was actually ignition. The backlash didn't expose a mistake, it exposed a fault line, a divide between what fans think the league should reward and what the league quietly responds to now. And once that divide surfaced, the conversation stopped being about whether the selection was deserved. It became about why the reaction was this strong in the first place. The stats were the first thing people reached for, and not because they added clarity, they added certainty, a clean way to shut the door on the conversation before it could get complicated. 7 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, limited starts, limited yardage. On paper, it looked decisive. Those numbers circulated faster than the announcement itself, framed as the final word on why this never should have happened. And to be fair, if you freeze the evaluation right there, the argument feels airtight. That stat line doesn't resemble the traditional Pro Bowl profile. It doesn't scream dominance or efficiency. It doesn't fit the historical mold the award was built on. In another era, those numbers alone would have kept a quarterback far away from all-star conversations. That's exactly why they became the centerpiece of the backlash. They were familiar, comfortable, easy to rally behind. But that's also where the logic started to crack, because those numbers weren't new. They didn't change the day the selection was announced. They existed weeks before the Pro Bowl slot opened. And somehow, they only became disqualifying once a spotlight was pointed in that direction. That alone says something about how selective outrage can be. What the stat-heavy criticism ignored was context, small sample size, early career volatility, a season shaped by instability, adaptation, and limited opportunities. None of that fits cleanly into a tweet or a headline graphic, so it gets left out. The numbers get flattened and presented as the whole story, even though they rarely are for young quarterbacks. More importantly, those figures were being used to argue something broader, without ever saying it out loud. That value should only be measured through production, that narrative presence doesn't matter, that attention is a side effect, not a factor. The irony is that this argument was being made on platforms fueled entirely by engagement. The same environment that turned those stats into viral ammo is the one redefining how relevance is generated. This wasn't just about whether Shedeur Sanders played at a Pro Bowl level. It was about whether the league still defines level the way it used to. And the uncomfortable truth is that the numbers weren't being debated to understand his impact. They were being used to defend an older framework that's quietly losing influence. Because if stats alone still dictated recognition, this story wouldn't exist. There would be no backlash to analyze, no debates to replay, no sustained attention. The numbers would have spoken, and the moment would have died there. Instead, the reaction revealed that stats no longer end conversations, they start them. And once you realize that, the numbers stop being evidence, they become props, tools in a larger argument about what the league values now versus what it says it values. The interception totals didn't block the spotlight, they intensified it. And that's when it became clear this was never just about performance, it was about visibility colliding with tradition, and tradition didn't have the leverage it used to. At some point, the league stopped pretending this was accidental. Visibility didn't sneak into the conversation, it replaced something. And once that happened, moments like this stopped being judged only on what happened between the lines. They started being evaluated on what happened everywhere else. Because in the modern NFL, attention isn't noise, it's an asset. The ability to pull eyes, trigger debate, and dominate timelines carries real weight. Broadcast decisions follow it, sponsorship dollars chase it, front offices track it whether they admit it publicly or not. And that's why this Pro Bowl nod landed differently. It wasn't just a roster update, it was a visibility spike, delivered by the league itself. For Shedeur Sanders, this wasn't about validation from traditional gatekeepers, it was about amplification. One official graphic, one announcement, one label added next to his name, and suddenly his presence carried a different kind of authority, not because the film changed, but because perception did. Once the league endorses your relevance, even passively, it changes how everyone downstream treats you. This is where old arguments fall apart. Fans talk about merit like it's static, like it lives only in box scores, but the league operates in an economy of attention. If a player moves conversations, drives engagement, and keeps people watching, that player becomes valuable in ways statistics can't fully capture. Visibility creates gravity, and gravity pulls opportunity toward it. That's why outrage didn't scare the NFL off. It confirmed the decision's usefulness. Every viral argument extended the lifespan of the story. Every clip debating whether the nod was deserved kept the name circulating. And circulation is exactly what the league thrives on. Silence kills relevance. Debate multiplies it.
The uncomfortable truth is that awards aren't just reflections anymore. They're inputs. A Pro Bowl nod doesn't merely recognize status, it creates it. It gives agents language, it gives brands confidence, it gives front offices a shorthand they can reference without defending every detail. Pro Bowl quarterback fits neatly into slides, pitches, and negotiations. That label simplifies perception, even when the path to it was messy. This is why visibility functions like currency now. It accumulates, it compounds, and once you have it, everything you do carries more weight. A good game travels further. A bad game sparks larger debates. Neutral moments become content. The spotlight never turns off because the audience has already been trained to watch. What made this Pro Bowl selection powerful wasn't the honor itself, it was the signal it sent. The league didn't just acknowledge a player, it fed the ecosystem that turns relevance into leverage. And once that machine starts running, it doesn't care how the attention began. Which raises the question no one wanted to ask out loud. If visibility is the new currency, then what happens when players learn how to generate it on their own? Because this moment wasn't random. It was the product of timing, narrative, and reach aligning at exactly the right second. And that alignment is already forcing the people in charge to rethink how value is actually created. From the outside, it still looks simple. Develop the quarterback, let the film speak, revisit the conversation later. That's how teams are supposed to operate. But inside the building, it's never that clean. And for the Cleveland Browns, this Pro Bowl moment quietly complicated everything. Because Cleveland isn't just managing a player anymore, they're managing timing, optics, and a shifting leverage balance that wasn't supposed to tilt this early. A fifth-round quarterback is normally a long-term project, someone you evaluate patiently while the salary clock works overwhelmingly in your favor. Low cost, low pressure, minimal noise. That's the whole point of drafting value late. But that formula breaks when the player's visibility outpaces his contract. Suddenly, the rookie deal isn't a safety net, it's a ticking clock. The more attention the quarterback generates, the faster expectations inflate, and the harder it becomes to keep development conversations internal. Every snap is watched, every decision is framed, every adjustment feels like a referendum instead of a step in a process. Publicly, the Browns can stay calm. Privately, the math looks different. They now have a quarterback whose name carries weight beyond the huddle. Jersey demand, media segments, broadcast relevance. None of that shows up in a playbook, but it shows up everywhere else. And front offices don't ignore revenue signals, no matter how disciplined they claim to be. This is where the dilemma really forms. If the Browns fully lean in, build around him aggressively, and elevate the narrative, they accelerate his value growth. That's good for relevance and engagement, but it drives up future cost. If they hesitate, slow play development, or publicly hedge, they risk friction with a fan base already paying attention. Either path comes with pressure, and neither fits the traditional fifth-round template. What complicates it further is timing. Coaching staffs change, systems reset, windows open and close quickly. The organization doesn't get the luxury of waiting 3 years to see how this feels. Decisions made now shape perception later, and perception is exactly what's inflating this situation in the first place.
There's also the human element. Quarterbacks know when their value is rising.
Agents know when leverage is quietly forming, and the league certainly knows when a player becomes a conversation driver. Even without formal contract talks, the groundwork gets laid early. Every public acknowledgement, every endorsement, every accolade becomes part of a future argument. The Browns didn't plan for this. They gambled on upside and efficiency and ended up with exposure. That's not inherently bad, but it forces a different kind of discipline. One misstep can look like mishandling a franchise face. One breakout moment can lock in expectations the cap sheet isn't ready for. And here's the quiet irony. This dilemma isn't created by elite production, it's created by relevance. The team isn't reacting to box scores, they're reacting to momentum. And momentum doesn't wait for internal evaluations to catch up. The Pro Bowl nod didn't force Cleveland into an immediate decision, but it removed the option of ignoring the future. From this point forward, every move they make feeds a larger valuation narrative, whether they intended to or not. And once that narrative starts shaping how the league sees your quarterback, it stops being just your story to control. For decades, quarterback value followed a familiar formula. Production led the way, wins reinforced it, accolades arrived after the numbers piled up. Everything flowed in one direction, from performance to recognition to payday. It was clean, predictable, and increasingly out of sync with the way the league actually functions now. Because value in today's NFL doesn't wait for completion percentages to mature, it shows up earlier, louder, and across more channels. Attention has collapsed the timeline. A quarterback doesn't need to dominate statistically to matter. He needs to register. He needs to move the needle. And once he does, the conversation shifts from whether he belongs to how much he's worth. That's the quiet evolution this Pro Bowl moment exposes. The definition of quarterback value is expanding, and it's no longer confined to what happens on Sundays. Reach matters. Engagement matters. Narrative momentum matters. Teams are no longer evaluating players in a vacuum. They're measuring ecosystems. How much attention does this player bring? How long does he hold it? And what does that attention translate into for the franchise? This isn't about replacing football fundamentals. Performance still anchors everything, but it's no longer the sole driver of leverage. A quarterback who consistently dominates conversation carries a different kind of weight than one who only appears when the stat sheet demands it. The league's economics reflect that reality, even if its rhetoric hasn't caught up yet. What makes this shift uncomfortable is that it doesn't produce clean comparisons. There's no single metric for influence, no standardized chart for visibility. One quarterback may deliver elite efficiency with minimal fanfare. Another may generate persistent attention with uneven output. In the old model, the choice was obvious. In the new model, it's a debate that has to account for reach, brand alignment, and market resonance. This is why front offices are being forced into harder conversations. How do you price a player who elevates relevance even before he elevates performance? How do you weigh steady competence against explosive visibility? These aren't theoretical questions anymore. They're shaping negotiations in real time.
The Pro Bowl nod acts as an accelerant in this new framework. It stamps legitimacy onto momentum. It takes something that lived in the abstract and makes it official. That matters because official recognition simplifies complex arguments. It allows teams, agents, and brands to point to something concrete while discussing something increasingly abstract. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Fans didn't cause this shift. The league did. Broadcast deals, social platforms, digital engagement strategies, all of it incentivizes reach as much as results. Quarterbacks sit at the center of that ecosystem, whether they want to or not. Some learn how to operate within it. Others get dragged along. This isn't a future trend. It's already happening. The definition of quarterback value now includes visibility, relevance, and market gravity alongside yards and touchdowns. The film still matters, but it's no longer the whole story. And once a player crosses into this expanded valuation tier, it becomes almost impossible to roll it back, because value, once perceived, doesn't easily shrink. What looked like damage control turned out to be rocket fuel. The criticism didn't stall the moment, it sharpened it. Every take meant to tear the selection down ended up reinforcing exactly why it worked in the first place. Attention multiplied, not faded. And in today's NFL economy, that distinction changes everything. When Cam Newton labeled the selection rage bait, he framed it as an accusation, but that phrase did something else entirely. It named the mechanism. Rage bait implies reach, it implies reaction, it implies an audience large enough to provoke. And once that label stuck, the conversation stopped being about whether the Pro Bowl nod was correct and started being about why it was so effective. Criticism has a strange effect in modern sports media. It doesn't close loops, it opens them. Every negative take invited a response. Every response generated a clip. Every clip became content. The debate became self-sustaining, and through it all, one name stayed at the center, not because it was being defended universally, but because it was unavoidable. That's the shift traditionalists struggle with. In older cycles, backlash was a warning sign. Too much criticism could bury a player. Now, backlash signals relevance. It confirms that the audience cares enough to argue. Silence is far more dangerous than controversy, and Shedeur was anything but silent in the discourse. What made this moment uniquely advantageous is that the controversy wasn't tied to scandal or off-field issues. It was about legitimacy, about worthiness, about whether recognition had come too early. Those debates don't poison value, they tease it. They suggest upside. They imply potential that hasn't been settled yet, which keeps people watching for resolution. This kind of attention also compresses timelines. Normally, it takes years for a quarterback to become a national talking point. That status arrives after playoff wins, statistical dominance, or signature moments. Here, the conversation arrived first. The platform was built before the peak, and that changes leverage, because leverage grows faster when anticipation outpaces outcome. The outrage also reframed the Pro Bowl nod itself. Instead of being remembered as a quiet replacement, it became a reference point. The moment people argue about, the example analysts revisit, the turning point fans cite when talking about how the league is changing. That permanence is invaluable. Moments don't need universal approval to matter. They need recall.
And here's the part no one acknowledges in real time. Critics don't control how their commentary is used. Once it enters the media stream, it gets repurposed, reshaped, and redistributed. A dismissive quote becomes a headline. A sarcastic remark becomes a debate segment. Opposition turns into amplification. The controversy didn't validate performance, it validated presence. It confirmed that Shedeur Sanders was important enough to argue about, early enough in his career to benefit from it. That combination is rare, and once it happens, it's almost impossible to manufacture again. The backlash didn't weaken his standing, it clarified it. It showed exactly where he sits in the league's attention hierarchy, right in the middle of the conversation. And in the modern NFL, that's where value is born. There's no undo button for moments like this. The announcement went out, the graphics were published, the debates played on loop, and now the designation exists in permanent form. Pro Bowl quarterback. Not provisional, not contextual, logged, archived, and attached to a name that will carry it into every future evaluation. Whether people agree with how it happened doesn't matter anymore. The moment already did its work. That's what makes this so uncomfortable for the old guard. This wasn't supposed to happen like this. Not this early, not without overwhelming production, not through a replacement slot that usually disappears by the next news cycle. But once the league validated the moment, even indirectly, it crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. You can argue the process, but you can't erase the outcome. This wasn't about winning an exhibition game or cashing a bonus check. It was about shifting perception. And perception, once established, becomes its own form of truth. Every future conversation now starts from a different baseline. Evaluations change tone, negotiations change posture, media coverage changes framing. One nod recalibrated the entire context. For the Cleveland Browns, the calculus is forever altered. They're no longer developing a low-profile prospect in peace. They're stewarding an asset with visibility, expectations, and a growing valuation that doesn't wait for internal timelines. Every decision carries weight now, because every decision feeds a larger narrative that the team no longer fully controls. For the league, this was a quiet acknowledgement of where things are headed.
Performance still matters, but it's no longer the only currency. Influence sits next to efficiency. Reach sits next to results. The Pro Bowl didn't create that reality, it confirmed it. And once confirmed, it became part of the infrastructure of how value is recognized. And for Shedeur Sanders, this moment functions as a lever, not because it proves anything about where he is now, but because it changes where he's evaluated from going forward. His career no longer unfolds in anonymity or patience. It unfolds under lights, debates, and expectations that multiply with every appearance. That's why this isn't a footnote. It's a financial and cultural event disguised as a roster update, a signal sent not just to fans, but to front offices, agents, and brands watching closely. The league didn't just fill a spot, it legitimized a shift. The real takeaway isn't whether the selection was deserved by old standards. That argument is already fading. The real question is what comes next when visibility becomes institutionalized this early. Because once attention is stamped with official recognition, it doesn't shrink, it compounds. This moment can't be walked back. It already reshaped the landscape it entered. And whether people like it or not, it's now part of how quarterbacks will be judged, valued, and paid in the era ahead.